My name is Clara. I'm 38 years old, and for the last 20 years, I've run my family's hardware store. This past Christmas, my parents gathered our family and proudly handed my brother a check for $2.5 million to fund his next brilliant venture. They gave me a sweater, but what they didn't know was that my quiet, watchful grandmother was about to stand up and with a single leather-bound folder change the course of all our lives forever. If you've ever felt like the invisible child in your own family, you're going to want to hear this. Before we dive in, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss the stories of justice we share here. To understand the explosion that happened that Christmas, you need to understand the slow burn that preceded it for 2 decades. My life was supposed to be about color and canvas, not concrete and caulk. I was accepted into the Rhode Island School of Design with a scholarship. My portfolio was my soul, filled with vibrant landscapes and intimate portraits. It was everything I had ever worked for. But just 2 months before I was set to leave, my father, Richard, had a massive heart attack. He survived, miraculously, but the prognosis was grim. He needed to avoid stress at all costs, which meant he could no longer run Henderson's Hardware, the local institution that had been in our family for 3 generations. It was the sole source of income for my mother, Eleanor, and was meant to support my younger brother, Alex, through college. My mother was devastated, a fragile porcelain doll threatening to shatter. Alex, then a freshman at Boston College, was considered the family's great hope. He was the brilliant one, the charmer, the one destined for a corner office with a skyline view. My destiny, it was decided in hushed, tearful family meetings I wasn't truly a part of, was to defer my dream. "Just for a year, Clara," my mother had pleaded, her eyes puffy and red, clutching my hand as if I were a life raft. "Just until your father is stable. The business needs a Henderson at the helm. It's your duty." 1 year turned into 20. The art supplies in my room gathered dust, the canvases yellowed, and my dreams were packed away in a portfolio under my bed like a treasured but forgotten relic. I learned about inventory management instead of impressionism. I learned about profit margins instead of perspective. I didn't just keep the store afloat, I made it thrive, through recessions and the rise of big-box competitors that crushed other local businesses. I poured my creativity not onto a canvas, but into community workshops, into designing a friendly store layout, into remembering that Mrs. Gable needed pet-safe paint for her nursery and that Mr. Chen was building a treehouse for his grandkids. Henderson's Hardware became my life's work, a place of quiet pride. But in my family's eyes, it was my gilded cage, a testament to my failure to launch. Alex, on the other hand, was a shooting star, his ascent fueled by the quiet, steady engine of the store I ran. My parents funded his entire Ivy League education, his unpaid internships in New York, his first high-end condo. Every phone call with them was a breathless update on Alex's latest triumph. "Alex just closed a huge deal. Alex is being headhunted by a firm in London. Alex's new girlfriend's father is a senator." My achievements were met with polite, dismissive nods. When I secured a lucrative contract to supply all the materials for a new community center, a deal that guaranteed our profits for the next 2 years, my mother's response was, "That's nice, dear. Did I tell you Alex is learning to sail?" When I was named Small Business Owner of the Year by the local Chamber of Commerce, they missed the ceremony. The reason? Alex needed them to dog-sit his French bulldog, Penelope, because he'd won a last-minute trip to Cancun. The excuse was so flimsy it was insulting, but the message was crystal clear. My world, my achievements, were small and insignificant compared to his. The pattern was cemented early and reinforced with a painful consistency. I remember missing my best friend's wedding in Hawaii because our store manager had a family emergency. I couldn't find a replacement, and I couldn't close the store. It was our busiest season. I cried watching her Instagram stories from my tiny office. That same month, my parents wired Alex $5,000 so he could join his friends on a networking trip through Spain. When I gently pointed out the disparity, my father sighed. "Clara, it's different. Alex is building a career. You're running a shop. It's not the same kind of pressure." The only person who seemed to see the truth was my grandmother, Rose, my father's mother. At 85, she was sharp as a tack, a woman of few words but profound observation. After her husband, my grandfather, passed, she sold her home and moved into a small in-law suite my parents built for her. She was a quiet presence in the house, always reading in her armchair or tending to her small garden. She would visit me at the hardware store, never saying much, but her eyes would scan the bustling aisles, the happy customers, the neat shelves. She'd watch me interact with people, solve their problems, and offer a small, knowing smile before leaving. Her quiet approval was a balm on the constant, low-grade sting of my parents' indifference. It was a silent conversation between us, a shared understanding that what I was doing mattered. I had long ago made peace with my role, or so I told myself. I loved the store, I loved my community, and I had built a good, if modest, life. I told myself their validation didn't matter. But deep down, the little girl who just wanted her parents to be proud of her was still there, quietly hoping. That dull ache of being perpetually second had become a part of me, a phantom limb I had learned to live with. As I drove to my parents' house for Christmas dinner, the familiar scent of pine and roasting turkey unable to mask the tension, I had a knot in my stomach. A premonition that this year, the unspoken rules of our family were about to be shouted from the rooftops. I just never could have predicted who would be holding the megaphone. The house was decorated to within an inch of its life, a perfect Martha Stewart Christmas that always felt more like a stage set than a home. White lights twinkled on a massive Fraser fir. The dining table was set with heirloom china, and a fire crackled merrily in the hearth. As I walked in, I was greeted by a wall of sound, my brother Alex and his wife, Tiffany, holding court in the living room. Alex, looking effortlessly handsome in a cashmere sweater, was regaling my parents with a story about his recent trip to Aspen. Tiffany, adorned in delicate jewelry that caught the firelight, laughed at all the right moments. I placed my contribution, a homemade apple pie from a recipe passed down from Grandma Rose on the kitchen counter, next to a catered spread of gourmet appetizers. "Clara, you made it," my mother said, kissing the air near my cheek without breaking her adoring gaze on Alex. "Your pie looks rustic. Just put it over there." The word rustic was a polite term for not good enough for the main event. It was a small cut, but one of 1,000 I had endured over the years. I joined them in the living room, a satellite attempting to enter a well-established orbit. The store's annual toy drive was a huge success this year, I offered, hoping to connect. We collected over 500 gifts for the children's hospital. Oh, that's wonderful, dear," my mother said distractedly, her eyes already flicking back to Alex. "Alex, honey, tell them about the vintage ski lodge you stayed in. Was it really ski in, ski out?" I felt the familiar shrinking sensation, the feeling of becoming invisible. I retreated to a chair near the fireplace and found Grandma Rose watching me from her usual spot in the corner. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement that said, "I see." It was a small gesture, but it was enough to keep me anchored. The energy in the room was different this year. There was an undercurrent of excitement, a palpable buzz that seemed to emanate from my parents. They kept exchanging smug, secretive smiles, like two children who knew where the best presents were hidden. After we sat down for dinner, a meal I knew had been paid for by the store's holiday profits, my father, Richard, tapped his wineglass for attention. "Eleanor and I have a very special announcement to make after we eat," he said, beaming at Alex. "Something we've been planning for quite a while. A true Christmas miracle for the family." Alex raised his glass, a smirk playing on his lips. "Well, I can't wait." "To Christmas miracles," he toasted, his eyes glittering with an unearned confidence. He already knew. This entire performance was for my benefit. A carefully orchestrated play where I was the sole member of the audience meant to be surprised. The rest of the dinner was a blur of Alex's accomplishments, a monologue of his greatness with my parents as the fawning chorus. He was launching a new hedge fund. He was buying a new summer home in the Hamptons. He was considering running for a local office. My parents hung on his every word, their faces glowing with pride. They asked him endless questions, their voices filled with awe. They never once asked me how I was, how the store was, how my life was. I was a spectator at my own family's Christmas dinner. I pushed the perfectly roasted potatoes around my plate, my appetite gone. I could feel the weight of 20 years of sacrifices pressing down on me. Every early morning unlocking the store, every late night balancing the books, every missed vacation, every dream deferred, it all felt like it had been erased, rendered meaningless by the blinding shine of my brother's success. A success, I knew, that had been built on a foundation I had helped secure. As my mother brought out the dessert, she bypassed my rustic pie and went straight for the fancy patisserie cake Alex and Tiffany had brought. "Let's have this first, shall we?" she announced. "We need to celebrate." Celebrate what? I wondered. The continued and unrelenting proof that I was the lesser child? That my steady, quiet contribution was nothing compared to my brother's flashy, parent-funded ambition? The air crackled with anticipation as my father stood up, a large, ornate envelope in his hand. The moment of truth had arrived, and I had a sickening feeling it was going to be a truth I had always known, finally spoken aloud in front of everyone. My father cleared his throat, a theatrical gesture that commanded the room's attention. He held the envelope like a sacred artifact. "As you all know," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "Eleanor and I have always believed in investing in the future. Our greatest investment, of course, has been our children." He paused, looking from me to Alex, but his gaze lingered on my brother, his golden son, with an intensity that made my own presence feel like an afterthought. "Alex has always been a visionary," he continued, and I had to physically restrain myself from rolling my eyes. "He sees opportunities where others see risks. He builds empires while others, well, manage shops." The jab was so blatant, so unnecessary, that it sucked the air from my lungs. It was a line designed to draw a clear distinction, to put me in my place for everyone to see. I glanced at my mother, who was nodding in fervent agreement, a proud tear glistening in her eye. Tiffany preened, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Alex's arm, a silent co-conspirator in this public coronation. Alex, for his part, adopted a look of humble gravitas, as if he were a king about to be burdened with a great responsibility. He was an actor, and this was his finest performance. He even managed a small, self-deprecating shrug, as if to say, "I can't help being brilliant." From his first lemonade stand to his latest venture, he has never disappointed us. "He has made this family proud," my father boomed, "and we want to ensure his next venture, a bold new international fund, has the foundation it needs to succeed beyond anyone's wildest dreams." He tore open the envelope and pulled out a piece of paper. It wasn't a check. It was a letter from their financial advisor, a formal declaration. In recognition of his talent, his ambition, and his unwavering commitment to making his mark on the world, Eleanor and I are gifting Alex the sum of $2.5 million. The number hung in the air, obscene and overwhelming. $2.5 million. It was a sum I couldn't even fathom, a life-changing amount of money. It was more than the hardware store had profited in the last decade combined. It was a declaration not just of support for Alex, but of my own insignificance. It was the monetary value of my worthlessness in their eyes. The room erupted. My mother and Tiffany burst into happy tears, hugging Alex, who was now graciously accepting the letter from my father. "Dad? Mom? I'm speechless," he said, his voice husky with fake emotion. "I won't let you down. This will be my legacy." No one looked at me. It was as if I had vanished, a ghost at the feast. I sat frozen, the china pattern on my plate suddenly the most fascinating thing in the world. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The pain was so sharp, so absolute, that it circled back around to numbness. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was a public erasure. Then, Alex turned his attention to me, the benevolent king bestowing a crumb upon a peasant. "And Clara," he said, his tone dripping with condescending pity, "we didn't forget you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped box. "For you. A little something to show our appreciation for you, holding down the fort all these years." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a cashmere sweater. A lovely, expensive beige sweater. The color of invisibility. The ultimate consolation prize. The message was screamingly clear. "Here's a fortune to build an empire, son. And here's a sweater to keep you warm in your small life, daughter." "It's beige," my mother chirped happily. "Such a practical color for you, dear. It won't show the dust from the store." The casual cruelty of that comment, the easy way she categorized my life's work as a dusty afterthought, was almost more painful than the grand gesture to Alex. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and throw the plate of untouched cake against the wall. I wanted to ask them how they could be so cruel, so blind. How could they not see that the only reason they had $2, $5 million to give away, was because for 20 years I had shown up every single day to the family business they had abandoned? Henderson's Hardware wasn't just a shop. It was the engine that had powered Alex's entire ascent. It had paid for the mortgage on this very house, for the vacations they took, for the comfortable life they enjoyed. My work, my sacrifice, was the bedrock of their generosity to him. I tried to find my voice. I don't understand," I stammered, looking at my parents. "This is a lot of money. Where did it come from?" My father puffed out his chest. "We've been saving for years, darling. Liquidated some stocks. We believe in Alex. It's a smart investment." "And the store?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Did you take money from the business for this?" Alex laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Oh, Clara, don't be so parochial. The hardware store is a nice little hobby for you, but this is the big leagues. We're talking about global finance, not selling hammers and nails." His wife, Tiffany, giggled, a sound like tinkling, broken glass. The condescension finally broke through my numbness, replaced by a surge of white-hot anger. "A hobby?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I have worked 60-hour weeks for 20 years to make that hobby a success. It put you through college, Alex. It paid for this house. It paid for your condo, for your cars, for this very meal, and a free." "Now, Clara, don't be dramatic," my mother said soothingly, as if I were a hysterical child. "We're all a family here. A rising tide lifts all boats." "Does it?" I shot back, finally standing up. My chair scraped loudly against the wood floor. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've just built a luxury yacht for Alex and left me in a rowboat with a leak. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. My parents looked shocked that I had dared to disrupt their perfect Christmas narrative. Alex just looked annoyed, his moment of glory tarnished. It was Grandma Rose who finally broke the silence. She had been watching the entire exchange, her face unreadable. She slowly placed her napkin on the table and stood up, her movements deliberate and steady. "Richard, Eleanor, I think you've made a grave miscalculation." Her voice, though quiet, cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned to look at her. She wasn't looking at my parents or Alex. She was looking directly at me, and for the first time that night, I saw a fire in her eyes. I thought I knew what was coming. Perhaps a scolding for my outburst. But I was wrong. The quiet observer was about to step onto the stage. The foundation of their perfect Christmas was about to crack, and I had a feeling the tremors would bring the whole house down. My father turned to his mother with an expression of patronizing indulgence. "Now, Mom, this is a happy occasion. Let's not spoil it. It's a simple family financial matter, nothing for you to worry about." He spoke to her as one would to a child, patting her hand dismissively. "Nothing to worry about?" Grandma Rose repeated, her voice acquiring an edge of steel I had never heard before. She pulled her hand away from his. "You give one grandchild a fortune and the other a piece of knitwear, and you call it a happy occasion? Richard, your father would be ashamed of you." The mention of my late grandfather struck a nerve. My father's face flushed a deep, angry red. "How dare you?" he hissed. "You have no idea what it takes to run this family, to make these decisions. I am the patriarch now. This is my house. And my money." "Is it?" Grandma Rose asked, the question hanging in the air, sharp and pointed. The blatant disrespect, the sheer cruelty of their actions, finally coalesced into a single, undeniable truth in my mind. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. They had consciously, deliberately chosen to celebrate my brother by humiliating me. The sweater wasn't a thoughtless gift. It was a symbol of my place in the family hierarchy. Practical, serviceable, beige. My mother, sensing a loss of control, rushed to my father's side, creating a united front against me and now, her own mother-in-law. "Clara, you're upsetting your grandmother. And you're making a scene. This is about your jealousy of Alex, and it has been your entire life. We gave you the store. It's a perfectly respectable life for someone with your limitations." Limitations. The word struck me like a slap. My limitation was that I had stayed. My limitation was that I had been loyal. My limitation was that I had sacrificed my own dreams for theirs. I looked at their faces, my father's indignant rage, my mother's manipulative tears, Alex's bored arrogance, and I saw them clearly for the first time. Not as my family, but as strangers who wore familiar faces. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn their love, their approval, their respect. I had run their business, propped up their lifestyle, and enabled their blatant favoritism, all in the quiet hope that one day they would see me. That one day they would say, "Thank you, Clara. We couldn't have done it without you." But that day would never come. They couldn't see my contribution because to do so would be to admit their own dependence, their own failure. That was the moment I stopped fighting for their approval. The need for it just evaporated. It was a painful, gut-wrenching, and utterly liberating realization. The shackles of a lifetime of being good shattered. The leak in my rowboat wasn't a leak at all. It was the hole I had been drilling myself, letting their opinions flood in and sink me. I picked up my purse from the floor. "You're right," I said, my voice eerily calm. "This is a happy occasion. For you, I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas." End quote. I walked towards the door, ignoring my mother's shocked cry of, "Clara, where are you going? You can't just leave." As my hand touched the cold brass of the doorknob, Grandma Rose's voice stopped me. "Clara, wait! Don't go just yet." I turned. She was walking slowly towards the hallway that led to her in-law suite, her back straight and her steps purposeful. "There is one more gift to be opened tonight," she said, her eyes fixed on my parents, "and I believe this one has everyone's name on it." The look on her face was not one of anger, but of profound, righteous resolution. It was the look of a queen who was about to checkmate the entire board. Grandma Rose disappeared down the hallway for what felt like an eternity. The living room was thick with a tense, confused silence. My parents and Alex exchanged bewildered glances, clearly unsure how to react to this sudden shift in the evening's script. They had expected me to either storm out in a dramatic huff or retreat into wounded silence. They had not anticipated a countermove, especially not from the family's quiet matriarch. "What is she on about?" Alex muttered to my father, loud enough for me to hear. "Has she been into the sherry again?" "Be respectful," my father snapped, though he looked just as unnerved. When Grandma Rose returned, she was carrying a worn, dark green leather briefcase. It was my grandfather's. I hadn't seen it in years, not since his own passing. It held a certain gravitas, a weight of history. She walked with a regal slowness to the head of the dining table, the seat my father had presumptuously occupied, and placed the briefcase on the polished wood with a soft, definitive thud. She clicked open the two brass latches, the sound echoing in the silent room. From inside, she removed a thick, leather-bound folder and a set of keys. She placed the folder in front of her and looked at me. "Clara, come here, please." I walked back to the table, drawn by the quiet authority in her voice. She gestured for me to stand beside her. Then, she turned her gaze upon my parents and my brother, a judge about to deliver a verdict. "Richard," she began, her voice calm and measured, "you said earlier that this is your house and your money. You are mistaken on both counts." My father let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Mother, with all due respect, I think you're confused. Eleanor and I bought this house 25 years ago." "No," Grandma Rose corrected him gently. "I bought this house 25 years ago. Your father and I put down the deposit, and my name is on the original deed as the primary mortgage holder. You and Eleanor were simply co-signers, a formality to build your credit. A detail I believe you've conveniently forgotten over the years." She slid a document from the folder across the table. A deed. I could see her name, Rose Henderson, printed clearly at the top. My mother's face went pale. "And the money," Grandma Rose continued, her voice unwavering, "the stocks you so generously liquidated to fund Alex's future. Where do you think that portfolio came from?" "It was from my inheritance from Dad," my father started, his voice losing its conviction. "Partly," she conceded. "A small part, but the bulk of it, the seed money that allowed it to grow into millions, came from the sale of my family's property in Vermont after your grandfather passed. We invested it together, yes, but it was done under a family trust. A trust that your father and I established with a very specific set of rules. A trust of which I am the sole, lifelong trustee." "Oh." She produced another document, this one filled with complex legal jargon, but the words, "The Henderson Family Trust" and "Rose Henderson Trustee" were unmistakable. Alex, who had been watching this with a look of growing horror, finally spoke. "What are you saying, Grandma? That the money Dad just gave me isn't his to give?" "I'm saying," she said, looking directly at him, "that your father just gave you a gift from an account that he does not have the unilateral authority to access. He has made a promise he cannot legally keep." The air in the room became thin, heavy. My parents looked as if they'd been struck by lightning. This wasn't just a revelation. It was the dismantling of their entire reality, the foundation of their authority and pride, crumbling to dust before their eyes. Then, Grandma Rose turned her attention to the biggest piece of the puzzle. And then there is the matter of Henderson's hardware. She looked at me, and her expression softened. Your grandfather and I started that store with nothing but a small loan and a lot of hard work. We poured our lives into it. When he passed, he left his 51% controlling share not to your father but to me. Your father inherited 49%, a minority stake. He was meant to be a steward, a manager, not an owner. We saw the seeds of his ambition even then. We wanted to protect the business, to ensure it would always be a source of stability for the whole family. She slid the final, most important document out of the folder, the original ownership papers for the business. For 20 years, she said, her voice now filled with a quiet, fierce pride as she looked at me. My granddaughter Clara has been the true steward of this family's legacy. She didn't just manage a shop. She saved it. She nurtured it. She made it the heart of a community. She did this while her own dreams were put on hold, and while her brother was lauded for spending the very money she was working to generate. She picked up the set of keys from the table. They were the old, heavy brass keys to the store's safety deposit box, where the original signed share certificates were kept. I have watched in silence for far too long, she said, her gaze sweeping over my stunned parents and brother. I have watched you praise the branch while ignoring the root that fed it. I have watched you mistake glitter for gold. Tonight, that ends. She turned to me, her eyes clear and resolute. The secret weapon wasn't just these documents. The weapon was her quiet strength, her unwavering sense of justice. She had been playing the long game, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. And my parents' greed had just handed it to her on a silver platter. The silence that followed Grandma Rose's declaration was so profound I could hear the frantic pounding of my own heart. My father stared at the documents on the table as if they were written in a foreign language, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. My mother had sunk back into her chair, her hand covering her mouth, a small, wounded sound escaping her lips. Alex looked like a deer in the headlights, his entire future suddenly flashing before his eyes. This is impossible, my father finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. You let me believe for 30 years that I was in charge. I let you believe you had a responsibility. Grandma Rose corrected him sharply. A responsibility you have clearly forgotten. Your father's greatest wish was that the business would provide for the entire family, not that it would be used as a personal bank to fund the ambitions of one child at the expense of the other. Alex, recovering from his initial shock, sprang into action. He was a deal-maker, a negotiator. This was just another problem to be managed. Okay, let's all just calm down, he said, forcing a placating smile that didn't reach his panicked eyes. So there's been a misunderstanding about the corporate structure. That's fine. We can fix this. We can draw up new papers. We're a family, right? Grandma, obviously you see the potential in my new fund. The returns will benefit everyone. Let's not be hasty. He was trying to charm her, to manipulate the situation back into his favor, but he had fundamentally misjudged his audience. Grandma Rose looked at him with a pitying expression. Alexander, she said, using his full name for the first time that night. This is not a negotiation. This is a reckoning. For years you have taken. You have taken money, you have taken praise, and you have taken your sister's sacrifice for granted. You have treated her loyalty as your birthright. You speak of returns, but you have never understood the concept of a true investment. She turned her steely gaze back to my parents. And you too, she said, her voice laced with a deep, sorrowful disappointment. You are more to blame than he, Island. You fostered this. You nurtured his entitlement and cultivated Clara's silence. You saw one child's ambition as a virtue and the other's loyalty as a utility. You broke your daughter's heart tonight, and you did it with smiles on your faces. My mother began to sob, not the performative tears from earlier, but genuine, racking sobs of shame and loss. "We love her," she cried. "We love both our children." "Do you?" Grandma Rose challenged. "Or do you love the idea of a successful son more? Love isn't just a feeling, Eleanor. It's an action. It's showing up. It's seeing. It's valuing. You gave Clara a sweater for Christmas. A beige sweater. Did you ever once stop to think what her favorite color is? Did you ever ask what happened to her art? Do you even know the names of the employees who have worked for her for over a decade?" The questions hung in the air, a devastating testament to 20 years of willful ignorance. They hadn't. They didn't know. Finally, Grandma Rose picked up the folder and the keys. She walked around the table and stood directly in front of me. She placed the heavy keys in my hand, their cold metal a stark, tangible reality. "As the trustee of the Henderson Family Trust and the majority shareholder of Henderson's Hardware," she announced, her voice ringing with legal and moral authority, "I am enacting my succession plan. Effective immediately, I am transferring my entire estate, this house, the investment portfolio, and my 51% controlling interest in the business into a new trust. A trust for which Clara is the sole beneficiary and, upon my passing, will be the sole trustee." She placed the heavy folder in my other hand. "It's all in here," she said softly. "For my ears only. Everything is already prepared. Your grandfather and I planned this years ago, as a fail-safe. We hoped we would never need it." Then she raised her voice again for all to hear. "Clara will have full control. She will decide the future of the business. She will decide who lives in this house. And she will decide how the family's assets are managed." She paused, letting the full weight of her words land. "The letter of intent to transfer $2.5 million to Alex tonight, Richard, is now null and void. You will be canceling that transaction first thing in the morning." The room exploded. "You can't do this!" my father roared, finally finding his voice, his face purple with rage. "It's my family, my legacy." "It was never yours to control," Grandma Rose said calmly. "It was yours to nurture, and you failed." Alex lunged forward, his charming facade completely gone, replaced by a raw, ugly desperation. "This is insane. She'll ruin everything. She's just a shopkeeper. I'll sue. I'll contest this in court. I'll say you're senile, incompetent." "On what grounds?" Grandma Rose asked, unfazed. "That I am of sound mind and body and have chosen to give my own property to my deserving granddaughter? I had a full cognitive evaluation last month, Alexander. The documents are ironclad. I had them reviewed by 3 separate law firms." He turned on me then, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. "You planned this. You manipulated her, you snake. You've been plotting this all along, whispering in her ear." And for the first time, I found my voice, clear and strong, forged in the fire of that night's humiliation. "No, Alex," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I didn't plan anything. I didn't have to. I just showed up. Every day. For 20 years. I worked hard. I was loyal. And I loved this family even when it didn't love me back. This isn't a plot. This is a consequence. This is the bill for your entire life, finally coming due." My words hung in the air, undeniable and true. He had no response. His world, built on charm and handouts, had been leveled by the simple, brutal force of my quiet consistency. The shopkeeper had just inherited the kingdom. With my final words still echoing in the suffocating silence, I turned to my grandmother. "Let's go," I said quietly. She nodded, and together we walked out of the dining room, leaving my parents and my brother frozen in the tableau of their shattered world. We didn't look back. As we walked down the hallway, I could hear the first sounds of the implosion behind us, Alex shouting about his lawyers, my father yelling back about betrayal, my mother's hysterical sobs. We closed the door to Grandma Rose's suite, shutting out the chaos. Inside her quiet, tidy space, the scent of lavender and old books was a calming antidote to the poison in the other room. Grandma Rose went to her small kitchenette and put on a kettle for tea, her movements as calm and steady as ever. I sank onto her sofa, the heavy leather folder in my lap, the cold keys still clutched in my hand. The adrenaline that had surged through me during the confrontation began to recede, leaving behind a profound, trembling exhaustion. I felt a grief so deep it was physical, not for the money or the house, but for the family I had always wished for, the illusion of which had been irrevocably shattered tonight. They didn't love me, not in the way that mattered, and now I had to accept that. "It's all right to mourn them, child," Grandma Rose said, as if reading my mind. She set a steaming cup of chamomile tea in front of me. "You're not just losing the family you had, you're losing the family you always hoped you could have." Tears streamed down my face, silent tears of a pain that was 20 years in the making. She sat beside me, not speaking, simply offering her presence, a quiet anchor in my storm. We stayed the night in her suite. I couldn't bear the thought of driving home, of being alone. The next morning, a Saturday, I woke to the sound of hushed, frantic activity in the main house. Peeking through the curtains, I saw Alex's expensive sports car squeal out of the driveway. A few hours later, a moving van pulled up. My parents were leaving. They couldn't stand to stay in a house that was no longer theirs, under the authority of the daughter they had so thoroughly undervalued. They left without a word, without a goodbye. The silence they left behind was vast and echoing, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with possibility. That first week was a whirlwind of legal meetings. Grandma Rose and I met with her lawyers, who walked me through the trust documents. It was all true, all meticulously planned. I was now in control of a significant estate and a business I knew like the back of my hand. The first official action I took was to legally confirm the cancellation of the $2.5 million transfer my father had initiated. The lawyer confirmed it had been stopped. The first time I walked into Henderson's Hardware as the official majority owner felt different. The familiar smell of sawdust and metal polish was the same, but my place within it had shifted. I was no longer its caretaker. I was its future. My employees, many of whom had known me since I was a teenager, were universally supportive when I called a staff meeting to explain the change in ownership. They had seen my dedication for years. To them, this wasn't a coup. It was justice. My manager, a gruff but kind man named Frank, just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "It's about damn time, boss." I felt a surge of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. The quiet resentment that had been my constant companion for years was gone. In its place was a blank canvas. For the first time since I was 18, I could paint my own future, and I had the resources to do it. The world suddenly felt full of color again. 10 months later, the scent of fresh paint, rich coffee, and cedar shavings mingled in the air at Henderson's Hardware and Home. The name change was the first of many transformations. The blank canvas of my future, once terrifyingly empty, had been filled with vibrant, deliberate strokes, creating a masterpiece I never knew I was capable of. My first major project, my magnum opus, was the complete reimagining of the store. Leaning into the design skills I had suppressed for 2 decades, I tore down the walls of my own, making both literally and figuratively the oppressive, Cramped aisles were widened. Industrial fluorescent lights were replaced with warm, inviting track lighting. I transformed the dusty, utilitarian space into a bright, welcoming hub for the community. A place where people didn't just come to buy things, but to be inspired. The most radical change was the creation of a small cafe corner, the Rose, named in honor of my grandmother. With comfortable armchairs, a long wooden table for collaborative projects, and the best espresso in a 10-block radius, it quickly became the town's unofficial morning meeting spot. I'd see local contractors sketching blueprints on napkins, young couples debating paint swatches, and DIY enthusiasts sharing tips over lattes. The quiet hum of community was a constant, beautiful music in the background of my days. I started offering design workshops on weekends, color theory for homeowners, sustainable gardening, basic carpentry for women. They were booked solid for months in advance. My art, the part of me I thought had died, found a new and unexpected home. I even created a small gallery space near the entrance, a rotating exhibit to showcase the work of local artists who, like the younger version of me, just needed a wall to display their soul. The business wasn't just surviving, it was a celebrated destination, and our profits, reflecting this new energy, were up an astonishing 40%. I was no longer just running a store, I was curating a community. My own life mirrored the store's transformation. The big, silent house that had once been a stage for my family's dramas was now my sanctuary. I had set up a small art studio for myself in a sun-drenched spare bedroom overlooking the garden. The first time I picked up a charcoal pencil again, my hand trembled. It felt like greeting a long-lost friend. The muscle memory was still there, buried under layers of grief and duty. Slowly, hesitantly at first, and then with a rush of joyous abandon, I began to create again. The canvases were no longer filled with the landscapes of my youth, but with portraits of the people who now populated my world. Grandma Rose, her face a beautiful map of wisdom and resilience. Frank, my gruff store manager, his kindness shining through his weary eyes. The young artists whose work now graced my gallery walls. My life was finally in full color. Grandma Rose thrived in her new role as the Queen Mother. She had moved out of the cramped in-law suite and into the master bedroom of the main house, a room she said she hadn't slept in since my grandfather passed. Her health, which had been a quiet concern, seemed to improve dramatically with the weight of her secret finally lifted. She held a weekly board meeting with me in the garden, where over cups of tea she'd offer sage advice born from a lifetime of quiet observation. "Never mistake a loud voice for a strong one," she told me one afternoon. "The deepest rivers run silent." She was my mentor, my confidant, and my greatest cheerleader. She would often come and sit in my studio, watching me paint in comfortable silence. One day, she looked at a nearly finished portrait of herself, and her eyes welled up. "Your grandfather would be so proud, Clara," she whispered. "Not of the money, but of this. You finally found your way back to yourself." Our bond, forged in the fire of that Christmas, had become the most precious inheritance of all. As for the rest of my family, their lives had taken a decidedly different turn, a trajectory dictated by the harsh gravity of reality without a safety net. Without the income from the family trust and the status of their large home, my parents were forced to confront a life they had long been insulated from. They sold the house to me, technically, as it was now part of the trust I controlled, and downsized to a small, generic condo in a neighboring town. My father, stripped of his self-appointed patriarch status, was adrift in a humble retirement he was ill-prepared for. His days, once filled with golf club lunches and managing his portfolio, were now long and empty. My mother struggled immensely with the loss of her social standing. Her friends, whose admiration was tied to the size of her home and the success of her son, gradually fell away. They reached out a few times, their messages a painful mix of weak apologies and passive-aggressive complaints. "The neighbors here are so noisy. Not like on our old street," my mother texted once. Another time, my father left a voicemail. "Just wanted to say we're sorry for how things went down. It's just, we're having trouble with the condo association fees." Their attempts at reconciliation were always tinged with a hint of financial need, a reminder that their old patterns were deeply ingrained. I maintained a polite but firm distance. After much deliberation with my grandmother, I set up a modest monthly stipend for them from the trust enough to cover their basic expenses comfortably but not lavishly. It was an act of grace, not obligation, and it came with clear boundaries. There would be no more emergency bailouts, no funding for a lifestyle they hadn't earned. "Mercy is not the same as weakness," Grandma Rose had advised me. "You can be a kind daughter without being a doormat." Our relationship, if it was to exist at all, would have to be rebuilt on entirely new, healthier ground, a process that was slow and often painful. Alex's downfall, however, was the most dramatic and complete. His bold new venture collapsed before it even began, without the $2. $5 million infusion. He couldn't secure the second and third rounds of funding from the serious investors he'd been courting. It turned out his brilliant reputation was a house of cards, propped up entirely by my parents' money and connections. When word got out in his high-stakes financial world that the family money had dried up, his backers grew nervous and pulled out. He was exposed for what he was. Not a visionary, but a gambler who had always been playing with house money. He was left with nothing but a mountain of debt from the lavish lifestyle he could no longer afford. The creditors came calling. He and Tiffany divorced 6 months after that Christmas. She had married into an expectation of wealth and status, and when that disappeared, so did she, taking a hefty settlement that was the final nail in his financial coffin. The last I heard, he was working a mid-level job as a personal banker in a suburban branch, a humiliating climb down for a man who saw himself as a titan of global finance. The Hamptons' summer home was a distant memory, the expensive sports car repossessed. He called me once, 3 months ago. The call came from a blocked number. The arrogant, charming voice I had known my whole life was gone, replaced by a desperate, wheedling tone I barely recognized. He asked for a loan. "Just 100,000, Clara, just to get back on my feet." He spoke of family, of blood being thicker than water, of the good old days. I let him finish, my heart a strange mix of pity and steel. "You're right, Alex," I had told him, my voice calm and steady. "Blood is thicker than water, and loyalty, respect, and gratitude are thicker than blood. You're my brother, and I won't see you on the street. I will pay for you to meet with a top-tier credit counselor and a therapist. I will help you learn how to stand on your own 2 feet, but I will not be your bank. That bank is closed for good." There was a moment of stunned silence before he exploded in a tirade of insults, calling me vindictive, cruel, a snake, and then he hung up. I didn't feel anger, just a profound sadness for the man he could have been if he had ever learned the difference between value and price. One crisp autumn afternoon, 10 months after that fateful Christmas, I was hanging a painting by a young local artist in the store's gallery. Grandma Rose was sitting in the cafe, holding court with a group of elderly ladies, her laughter echoing through the store. My life was full, it was mine, and it was peaceful. The beige sweater they had given me for Christmas, a symbol of my former life, sat in a donation bin somewhere. I had replaced it with a life filled with every color I could imagine. I had finally realized that my worth was never determined by their validation, but by the work of my own 2 hands and the quiet, unwavering belief of one person who had seen me all along. The greatest justice wasn't their failure. It was my flourishing. Looking back, That terrible Christmas was the best gift I ever received. It wasn't wrapped in pretty paper or tied with a bow. It was a painful, brutal, and necessary apocalypse that leveled a lifetime of inequity and allowed something new and beautiful to grow in its place. It was the moment the earth salted over, forcing me to finally plant a garden somewhere else. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about money or business. It was that you cannot let others define your value. For 20 years, I had operated under a quiet, unspoken bargain. I would trade my dreams for their approval. I would be the responsible one, the steady one, the one who stayed behind. And in return, I hoped for a crumb of the affection they showered so effortlessly on my brother. I accepted the role they assigned me in our family's play, the practical, reliable, lesser child. I wore it like a costume for so long that I almost forgot it wasn't my own skin. I did this because I was afraid to challenge the narrative, afraid to rock the boat, terrified that if I stopped being useful, I would cease to be loved at all. I thought their love was conditional on my quiet compliance. For 2 decades, I mistook my cage for a home. That Christmas night, the illusion didn't just crack. It shattered into a million irreparable pieces, and in the silence that followed, I heard my own voice for the first time. The shock wasn't the money, or even the blatant favoritism. The shock was realizing the depth of the lie I had been telling myself, that my sacrifice was seen, that my loyalty was valued, that my hard work was respected. It wasn't. It was simply expected. It was the air they breathed, the foundation they stood upon without ever looking down to see what held them up. What I came to understand, through the quiet wisdom of my grandmother, is that true family doesn't demand sacrifice, it values it. It doesn't see loyalty as an obligation, but as a gift to be cherished. True family shows up. It sees you. It loves you for who you are, not for the role you play in someone else's story. It celebrates your colors. It doesn't try to paint you beige. For my parents and brother, love was transactional. It was tied to status, ambition, and appearances. For my grandmother, love was a verb. It was the act of watching, of understanding, and when the time was right, of acting with fierce, unwavering justice. She taught me that family is not always the one you are born into, but the one that chooses to see your worth. And that was the core of it all, my worth. I had spent so long looking for it in their eyes that I never thought to look for it in my own hands. My value wasn't something they could bestow with a multi-million-dollar check or withhold with a condescending remark. It wasn't something they could define by calling my life's work a hobby. My worth was in every screw I had sorted, every customer I had helped, every late night I had spent ensuring the family legacy was secure. It was the root system I had been building in the dark all along, and when the storm came, it held firm. They had praised the flashy, flowering branch, but they had forgotten that the branch cannot exist without the root. Maybe you're listening to this right now, and you're the Clara in your own family. Maybe you're the quiet engine that keeps everything running, the one who smooths things over, the one whose contributions are taken for granted. Maybe you've made that same quiet bargain, telling yourself that your compliance is the price of admission to your own family. What I am here to tell you, from the other side, is that the price is too high. Your peace is not for sale. Your dreams are not disposable. The hardest lesson was learning to set a boundary. It felt unnatural, like a betrayal of my lifelong role. But I learned that setting a boundary isn't an act of war. It's an act of gardening. You are tending to the beautiful, sacred space of your own life. You are deciding what is allowed to grow there and what is a weed that will choke out the sunlight. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. The crisis didn't create my strength. It only revealed the strength that was there all along, buried under 20 years of trying to please people who were impossible to please. The money, the house, the store, they were just tools. The real inheritance was the freedom to finally, unapologetically, be myself. Have you ever had to be your own rescuer? What was that moment of clarity, that Christmas apocalypse, that forced you to put yourself first and reclaim your own narrative? How did you begin to rebuild and find your own colors? I would be honored to hear your stories of strength and transformation in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded of their own worth. Someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to pick up a paintbrush and color their own world. Thank you for listening. Remember, you are the author of your own life. You hold the pen. Don't ever let anyone else write your ending.